What if I told you the strongest figures in Islamic history are neither kings nor generals, but a small handful of eunuchs, being one of the trusted guardians for the most holy site in Islam itself, yet leading a life with absolutely no voice, family, or any kind of future? Just imagine the journey from enslaving men to becoming some of the strongest figures in the world of Islam. This story will make one question everything that has been assumed about power, loyalty, and sacrifice in the Muslim world. It is the 9th century deep inside the heart of the Islamic Empire. The teeming streets of Baghdad resound with the hum of traders, soldiers, and scholars alike. This city, a glittering jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate, boasts one of the largest libraries in the world, along with bustling markets and thinkers who are considered the greatest in the world. But behind the high walls of the harems, the sacred sites of Mecca and Medina, lies a darker reality. The sacred city is home to millions of pilgrims every year, but those guarding the most sacred spaces, the ones who control the very heart of Islam, are neither free men nor warriors. They are eunuchs, men who have been castrated and deprived of their identity, their freedom, and often even their humanity. Such men were not only given the keys to the most holy places, but were also among those closest to the mighty caliphs, kings, and rulers. They possessed a kind of power most of us would hardly associate with that condition. Imagine what it would be like to live your life in a position of power and yet be completely disconnected from your own personal identity. No family, no lineage, nothing to inherit or to pass on. How did men like these rise to the heights of influence and power in such a harsh political world? You might think eunuchs were just servants, but let me shock you. They were vital to the political stability of the Islamic world. These men who lived in the shadow of the caliphs were often the most trusted advisors, spies, and even military commanders. Their lack of family ties, their position outside of the traditional social hierarchy, made them uniquely suited to their role as confidants to the rulers. In this perspective of political betrayal being around any corner, the eunuch was deemed to be loyal because he had no family to whom he would transmit the power. Thus, there were no children to defend, and there were no heirs to protect. That presumption was part and parcel, then, with how they proved so valuable at the time. Many ran access to the caliphs, advising on matters concerning the state, running military operations. In fact, whole armies, under the most powerful figures of the Abbasid Caliphate, some renowned even now, such as the general eunuch, Bahlul, were held in control by them. Think about it, the men who had been entrusted with the task of controlling access to the caliphs, these rulers who held the keys to immense power, were men who had been reduced to nothing more than shadows of their former selves, often through brutal means. Yet, from this very vulnerability, they emerged as some of the most skilled and dangerous political figures in history. One of the most famous eunuchs in Islamic history should be Bahlul, who was not an ordinary eunuch, but an epic military leader during the Abbasid Caliphate. Born a slave, Bahlul was castrated early in his life and entered service in the palace. He gradually achieved the trust of the Abbasid caliphs, more particularly of Caliph al-Muqtadir, and his rise to power as a general commanding large armies in key battles helped shape the political landscape around him by using his wits and ruthlessness. But his story is even more fascinating when you realize the role he played in the court itself. Not only was he an advisor and a military leader, but Bahlul was also a key figure in maintaining the loyalty of the palace guards. Because of his eunuch status, he should have been the ideal figure to manage the power dynamics of the palace. No family to protect, no ambitions of his own, a figure whom no one can easily manipulate. Bahlul's success was a result of a peculiar combination of trust, power, and control over the security of the caliph. His rise to power is only one example of how, despite their circumstances, eunuchs gained immense influence in the political and military affairs of the time. But the eunuchs weren't just military strategists or political advisors. One of their most important roles was serving as guardians of Islam's holiest sites, the Haram in Mecca and Medina. These eunuchs, not leaving heirs or families of their own, had a sacred job: the protection of the sacred places that every year receive millions of Muslims in prayer. Hardly anything was as important as this duty. The haram was the center of spiritual life, but also political and economic power. Whoever controlled the haram controlled the pulse of the Islamic world. It's almost ironic, isn't it? It means guardians of the most sacred spaces in Islam, who were charged to take care of the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad, were men devoid of all kinds of direct connections to family, lineage, and bloodlines. It was related to the sacred space due to their pure loyalty and dedication to their caliphs. The role of guardianship by eunuchs was symbolic. They had given up their lineage in order to protect something much greater than themselves. But how did the eunuchs manage to live and prosper in such a cutthroat environment? It wasn't just a question of whether the eunuchs were loyal in Islamic politics. It was, rather, their skill in keeping the complex web of politics, rivalries, and shifting alliances within the caliphate. Their lack of family involvement meant they didn't compete in the family feuding that often tore powerful dynasties apart. In an empire where betrayal and assassination were common, the eunuchs were seen as neutral figures. They were often the go-betweens, the middlemen who knew how to balance competing factions. Because they had no family to fight for, no personal legacy to protect, they could be trusted to advise the caliph without any personal ambitions clouding their judgment. This made them some of the most powerful figures in the empire. Eunuchs didn't just serve at the pleasure of the caliph. They had a voice, and they knew how to wield it. They could decide who had access to the caliph, which generals would rise to power, and which diplomats would secure important treaties. The story of the eunuchs of Islam is one that forces us to reimagine how we define power, loyalty, and influence. These men were devoid of their masculinity and social standing, yet built empires with their intellect, commitment, and guile. They remind us that power isn't always about brute force or bloodlines. Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time and being willing to make sacrifices that others can't even imagine. The eunuchs may have lost one form of life, but in doing so they gained an entirely new kind of power. A power built not on physical strength, but on loyalty, intelligence, and the ability to navigate complex, dangerous political landscapes. The lesson herein is deep. Sometimes in life, the hardest situations one goes through end up creating the most unlikely forms of strength. The eunuchs did not control their fates, yet they became architects of the empire. They show us that sometimes life's most difficult challenges are the ones that create the most resilient leaders. So what is the lesson to be learned from the eunuchs of Islam today? How can we use adversity to create resilience in our own lives? If you've ever felt like circumstances were beyond your control, remember that these men built their power in a world where they had no voice and no future. They transformed their vulnerability into their greatest asset. If you found this story fascinating, please like, comment, and share with your friends. How do you think adversity shaped today's leaders? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, it's not the power you're born with, but the one you create.